It's ready. Yep. All right. Thank you for joining us for our session today, Promise and Purpose, the Heart of Virtual Interactive Readalouds. My name is Dr. Lindsay Stoetzel, and my co-presenter today is Dr. Stephanie Shedrow. We've been colleagues since our time together as graduate students, and now we both currently teach literacy methods courses for elementary teachers at 2 different institutions in the Midwest. Our interest in today's topic pretty much arose out of the jumbled mess that was spring 2020, as we found ourselves trying to prepare beginning teachers to teach literacy in traditional classrooms while all of their field experiences were taking place virtually or in newly hybrid settings. So, as we looked across the literacy teaching practices that are foundational to our courses, we wrestled with how to achieve a meaningful balance between face-to-face and digital pedagogy. In particular, we kept coming back to this one core practice, the interactive read aloud. We wondered, how could we achieve the magic and purpose of the interactive read aloud in a virtual environment? Was it even possible to recreate this experience in an asynchronous format without children physically present? In this session, we'll share findings from our research in the classroom as we offer strategies and planning tools to ensure that virtual interactive read-alouds are more than just a superficial pastime. Finally, we'll offer ideas for how to use virtual interactive read-alouds as tools that can even make the leap back into our face-to-face classrooms, as many of us make that transition this fall. So here are our goals for today. First, we're going to revisit the traditional practice of interactive read aloud and its role in the literacy classroom. And we believe this is important to start with because looking at the research helps us to define what our purpose is. Next, we present possibilities of recorded and readily available read-alouds online, a term that we have coined ready-made read-alouds. Once we know what virtual read-alouds can look like, then we'll turn to planning reading experiences for asynchronous and synchronous settings. As we have all learned, there's a lot more to digital read-alouds than just sharing a video link with children. You actually have to plan the reading experience to still engage them. And then finally, we'll take this practice one step further and look at ideas for how you can design interactive digital read-alouds for your own classroom. We have some tools, examples, and firsthand teacher stories to share with you about what our pre-service teachers have learned over these last few months. All right, so starting at the beginning, why use the interactive read-aloud? Anyone who has spent time in a literacy or ELA classroom is probably familiar with the interactive read aloud. So let's start by just taking a minute to close your eyes and visualize what pops into your head when you hear the term interactive read aloud. What do you picture? Because of the high degree of flexibility, this classroom staple has found a home across the K-12 spectrum. So some of you may have envisioned children gathered together on the reading rug with the teacher sitting in the middle, a picture book in hand, that very warm, fuzzy experience. But others may have pictured older students sitting at their desks, but still kind of relaxed or in that calm state, as they're picturing the action of the chapter book in their head as their teacher reads aloud. So while the context will impact the practice, it's important to also consider the teacher's goal and purpose for using the interactive read aloud. While the range of this practice can make it challenging to define, there are a few common characteristics that can impact the success of your interactive read aloud. And we have them kind of highlighted on this slide here. First is intentional text selection. We know that teachers need to be very intentional in selecting text to feature during read alouds. These provide opportunities to explore skills and strategies, as well as to offer windows and mirrors into experiences and identities. Once you have your text, the next step is really to focus on strategic stopping points. So Intentional read alouds don't just happen. There is foresight and planning into deciding where to stop when reading and some of the prompts that you might pose to students. In addition, as the reading takes place, interactive read alouds emphasize interaction. So the teacher is the one that's decoding or reading the text aloud, but the children are the ones that are interpreting or making meaning from the text based on prompts the teacher gives, and also discussion and interaction between children as they kind of puzzle through and engage their comprehension skills. And then that leads us to the final characteristic. They foster engagement. Ideally, we want the read aloud to be a motivating experience that exposes them to more books and feels like a meaningful, rich experience. So as Birkins and Yaris remind us, while all read alouds may not have a very clear literacy skill or focus because they're more focused on the ideas in the book or the social emotional learning aspects, you can couple the two together. And we'll look at how to do that here briefly. So when it comes to purpose, you can see we've highlighted kind of yellow and gray, two different groups of purpose you can build into your read aloud. So the goals in gray are focused on building core dimensions of literacy skills, such as applying visual literacy skills, building word study skills, modeling fluent reading, strategically examining vocabulary, deepening comprehension, or integrating your reading strategies. We can also pair these with the goals in gold. These are focused on engagement. So how can we use the read aloud to examine real world issues, strengthen literary interpretations, create collaborative reading experiences, foster engagement, support social emotional learning, and connect to student lives? We want to consider both of these because they can reinforce each other, but they can also come into conflict. So for example, an interactive read aloud where the teacher interrupts the reading too often and tries to build too much into it is clearly going to undermine engagement with the text. So we might need to pause in those cases and ask ourselves, is this text appropriate if we have to keep stopping to describe what's happening? Is it the stopping points that need to be revised? Or is there too little emphasis in this read aloud on superficial interactions? But by being intentional, we can balance skills and motivation as a way to use authentic reading experiences as a springboard for growing literacy skills. The next slide outlines some ideas to strategically plan with purpose, considering all the ideas we've discussed so far. So it starts with choosing a clear goal, and this could be aligned to the Common Core standards, does not need to be. Selecting the text, thinking about those stopping points, having a roadmap. Some teachers use even sticky notes in the book somewhere as a reminder, either on the pages or in the back of the book, of where they're going to stop and some of the things they want to ask. Identifying resources in the classroom. This could be anchor charts, visual or digital aids, or other organizers that you want to reference and integrate into the read aloud. There could be, additionally, we want to think about how to connect. So this would be building background knowledge or connecting to prior personal knowledge before the read aloud begins. We want to give a really clear purpose to students. Then during the reading, we pause, prompt, and listen, keeping in mind that even when we stop at our designated stopping points, students might also want to stop at different parts. They may become really engaged in something, and we want to create space for those spontaneous responses. And then finally, as we actively engage readers, this can extend after the reading too, as we go back and think about the things we've unpacked and make new connections across and beyond the text. So with this in mind, we've kind of covered what an interactive read aloud looks like, but what is a ready-made read aloud? We use the term ready-made to describe read alouds that have already been read and exist online as accessible materials ready for use. So ready-made read-alouds can take multiple forms, and teachers can intentionally plan to use many different formats in their classroom. The important thing is that when we use the ready-made read aloud, we want to design a reading experience around it, because often these ready-made resources don't do the things we know interactive read alouds do. They don't build background knowledge. They don't ask interactive questions to students. They don't connect to students' lives. So we have to design the reading experience to situate the ready-made read aloud inside of. So let's look at some examples of these read aloud formats to give you a better sense. The first type of ready-made read aloud is recorded story time. This is when you basically just read the book. You're going to see celebrities, politicians, firemen, neighbors, even children doing these types of story time readings. They're focused on engagement and providing access to books, but they really are just a literal reading of the book from cover to cover. And as literacy teachers, we know that is one of the more superficial ways we can engage comprehension and literacy skills while reading. Here is one example of a wonderful resource, though, to find some of these recorded story times. Netflix Junior has a group called Bookmarks, and it has a number of celebrities who are reading books. Most recent ones featured books by Black authors read by Black actors. So this could be another place to check out, though you're going to find this type of ready-made read aloud pretty much anywhere on the internet. A slightly more advanced version of ready-made read aloud is the shared reading. This is where the book is held close enough to the camera, or it's literally a digital text, so children can follow along as the teacher is reading. This version is more likely to support fluency or decoding comprehension skills, because you can engage with both the text and the oral language of the text being read. So an example of this can be found on the Brightly Storytime channel on YouTube. These do an excellent job of highlighting text as the teacher reads. You can see different parts being emphasized. So you can see it's more geared for the reader to read with the teacher. The next type of ready-made read aloud, we have kind of called a read aloud that has opportunities for synchronous interaction. These examples, while the reader is reading, they literally pause and engage the viewer. They ask questions, typically beforehand, to do some of that background knowledge activation. They stop during the reading to point things out, and sometimes they stop after to ask some follow-up or connecting questions. These tend to be more strategic for addressing vocabulary or other focused reading skills or strategies, and not surprisingly, these are usually made by teachers. So one example that we really love is the Curiosity Club with Mrs. Ghazali, and she does a fabulous job of making the viewer feel like they're in the space with her and thinking through the concepts and ideas in the book. The final version is a little bit different. This one also focuses on synchronous interaction, but it's intended to provide guidance for like if I was watching with my child, I'm watching with my sibling, I'm watching with other people, so we are physically together, even though the read aloud is still digital. So it's a little bit different. In this case, you can use the materials to actually ask and answer and deepen questions. So even though the previous version, you could ask questions, there's no way for the reader to know what the viewer said. It's like watching Blue's Clues or Sesame Street. You engage, but it's one-dimensional. In this version, there is some engagement back and forth, though it might not happen live. It might be delayed, or it might happen where there's people engaging together, but the reader is still physically separate. So some examples of these, Storyline Online, fantastic place to find. Many of these books are going to be read aloud by celebrities once again, but they have an entire handout that comes with each read aloud that gives you the prompts, the questions before, during, after reading. So you could have this as a guide for parents to talk through and think through with their children as they're watching, or you could use it yourself as the teacher to facilitate discussion if you were to watch this together in a virtual room or in a face-to-face classroom. As we have covered so far then, the possibilities for what ready-made read-alouds can look like are really endless, but we can more intentionally select which ready-made read-alouds to use by focusing on the purpose or goals of our instruction. We really want to, in that case, align our purpose and our format.
So now that we've walked through the different types of ready-made read-alouds, it's important to think about how we can intentionally use these in our classrooms. So when we think about synchronous instruction, either via Google Classroom or Zoom, Google Meet, or within a face-to-face setting or a hybrid of both, we can use these ready-made read-alouds synchronously for online discussion boards. And when we think about online discussion boards, you might think back to your college days where there was an actual discussion board and people were typing a comment and replying to those comments. Discussion boards can look like that, and that's very easy to implement or easier to implement with the older grades, but we can take this further and use digital tools, perhaps such as Flipgrid or your learning management system and the digital recording tools that you have within there to allow students to audio record or video record their thoughts and reply to one another. One suggestion that we have for this is to scaffold it, and so that teachers are facilitating these discussions and perhaps even one-on-one with a student until they're really understanding what it means to make a comment or respond to an interactive read aloud prompt, and then how they comment or respond to one another. You really want to teach your students to address what their classmates said and not just make another comment that doesn't relate. We need the comments to flow as if a conversation would. Another way to use synchronous instruction is within small groups. So if you are teaching online, and Lindsay, I think I made a mistake here. Do we have to? So now that we've looked at the types of ready-made read-alouds available to teachers, let's talk about how we can use these within our classroom. So if you're in a synchronous setting, either online or face-to-face, there are multiple ways that you can use the ready-made read-alouds. The first is just discussions. So you can stop and pause a ready-made read-aloud within your class or with an online class to talk about the discussion or to talk about the book. So if you watch the read-aloud ahead of time and think about those prompts just as you would if you had the book and we're going to earmark it. So you have your stopping points, pause the video, ask a discussion question, and have students respond. You can also use small groups. This would work especially well if you're teaching in the primary grades. So instead of facilitating the read aloud into the entire class, you can work with a smaller group to therefore then have more time for the students to respond. This is especially important to think about if you are still working online. Students might not be as willing or feel as comfortable to participate in the discussion with the entire class. If the group is smaller, you can still use the ready-made read aloud, but then there are fewer students and the students that are there will have more time to interact and to discuss. And then for our older kiddos, online surveys. There are lots of digital tools out there that you can embed or use with these ready-made read alouds to foster interaction. You can then show the students the results synchronously, or if you choose to use these asynchronously, because all of these tools can also be used asynchronously, you can show them later. So for example, if you do a poll everywhere, what do you think about this character, or what were the motives behind this character's actions? Students can either type their responses, or you can have multiple choices, and then you can show the class results. Asynchronously, you can create discussion boards. When you think of a discussion board, you might think back to your college days where you wrote a comment and then your classmates responded to the comment. So you can use those traditional discussion boards in your classroom, but we can also take it a step further with the tools that are available to us now. So most learning management systems have recording tools where students can audio or video record themselves, so they can respond to the prompt that way, and then classmates could then type their response or also record audio or visually. For these, especially with the younger kids, but all the way through, there's some scaffolding that is needed to make these successful. We suggest that teachers first really interact with the discussion boards and model for students what it means to make a quality post and what it means to respond to it. In our own experience, we oftentimes see responses just being another comment that doesn't address what the original poster stated. And so really showing kids, how do I take a piece of that comment, talk about it, and then move the discussion forward as if we were in a face-to-face setting. Another way is discussion prompts. So just with some of the ready-made read-alouds, where there are things that can be taken with it, teachers can provide these for students and families as well. So for example, you use a ready-made read-aloud, create a few prompts, and send that along with the read-aloud. Students can then record themselves just responding to this and give it to you, or they can interact with family members and they can have a discussion around the book itself, recording it, or just having the conversation, and the teacher can then assess the student's comprehension or whatever skill that they're looking at within the read aloud. So what are some of these digital tools? I talked just a little bit about them. So Jamboard is an interactive tool that is part of the Google Suite. So if I click on over here to my Google Drive, to create a Jamboard, I just go to the New tab. You have to go to More, and then you get a Google Jamboard. And so it's pretty blank. It's there's not much here, but in here, students can they can type, they can pull in pictures from the internet, they can make different graphic organizers, and more than one student can work on these at the same time. So it's a Google document, but it's not so much feeling like that stagnant piece of paper. There's more possibilities here. So just like you would if you were going to share a Google document, you would have to share it with your students. They could respond to this in multiple ways. The entire class could be in here. You could do the KWL charts on here. There are different Google Jamboard templates that can be used. And a really common is to have students do the sticky note. So if I'm going to do a before reading background knowledge or schema map, what do you know about this? Students can record their existing schema in one color, and then what they've learned in another color, and then we can categorize our misconceptions in a third color. So there are different ways to organize this and use it, and the possibilities are pretty much endless. So another digital tool that we can use is a Pear Deck. So a Pear Deck is another tool within the Google Suite. So I'm going to pull up here a presentation. And so you need to download Pear Deck, and it becomes a Google add-on. And so then when you can open it here. So once you have your Google PowerPoint presentation, then you can add anything within the Pear Deck. So I have my existing PowerPoint here. If I wanted to make a multiple choice question for the students, I would then write the options in here. You can write anything you want. You update the slide and it adds it on there. So you can add multiple choice questions. You can add a website. So for example, if you wanted your students to visit the Jamboard, you could copy the website for the Jamboard and then place it right in here. Once this little tab is on there, then you know that it's linked up. They also have some pre-made slides. So some of my favorites here are the social emotional learning. So if I wanted to start my class with this, what is filling your bucket, what is draining your bucket, I just click on it and then it is inserted there. A great thing about Pear Deck is you can use it synchronously or asynchronously. So once you start the lesson, if you're going to use it synchronously, there's a little code that your students would type in when they go to the joinpd.com, or you can do it asynchronously and get a website. So you can create a link on your Google Classroom or send it out to students, and then they can work through it on their own. Zoom Whiteboard is another option. Zoom Whiteboard, of course, is here in Zoom, and it looks very much like the Jamboard, but it's the person that owns the, that is hosting, that is able to work on that. One really great thing about the Zoom Whiteboard is once something is created, it can be downloaded as a PDF. So if you're working through some class notes or ideas, capturing what students have said, you can download that and then you can insert it into a PowerPoint later. You have that captured right there. And finally, Cutie Cursor. So this is a really great tool if you are wanting to highlight print or directionality. You want students to follow along with what you're doing. Your little cursor here, you can make it into almost anything. You can have cursors that have a little tail of pixie dust, we like to say, that follows behind it, or different colors. There's one that's a watermelon with a smiley face and different animals. And this is just to help draw students' attention where you want to when you're working online. You know, in the classroom, we can easily point. This is where, you know, I'm talking about, but when they're online and there's different things distracting them, they might not know exactly where they should be looking. So we've talked about what ready-made read-alouds there are out there that we can pull into our classroom and how we can integrate interactions within those. But there are definitely times where it's appropriate for us to create our own read-aloud. Perhaps it's a series that of books that we want to use that we've created within a team, or you're using a purchased curriculum that has read aloud suggestions in there, and you need to integrate those into what you're doing. So how can we do that? We have talked about, through our research, 4 different types of digital read aloud formats. So the first one is a traditional, where the reader is shown just like I am here, and I'm holding the book. There are various ways that you can make the book more accessible to the viewer, and we're going to show you an example of that momentarily. But many times with this, the book is not as accessible to the reader because within the frame of the shot, the person is taking up most of the space and the book looks pretty small. So that's just something to think about when you're selecting what you want your read aloud to look like. The purpose needs to be connected to that. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So kind of the opposite of that is this close-up, the idea of a close-up. In that situation, either the reader is very small in the corner of the screen, much like we are right now, or the viewer can't even see the reader. And what we see are those digital books. So either the camera is positioned so that on a table, like the book is just shown, or the book has been scanned, or it's digital, and that's all you see is the book itself. Then there's an integrated mix of the two where there's some video editing that's required. So the reader would show themselves, perhaps holding the book, and then when they go to start reading, it cuts and you can just see the book itself. And finally, screencasting. So this is where the book is featured, but the teacher is always visible in the corner of the frame, and they use different digital tools within there as well. So if I'm going to create my own ready-made read aloud, there are some steps that I need to take. And we've created this planning guide, which is also in press, to help us think about how we can meaningfully create these ready-made read alouds. So as Lindsay spoke about earlier, we really need to first think about what our purpose is. So is our purpose to address a standard, to talk about or to think about foundational reading skills in some way, to check out vocabulary, or are we looking at something social, emotional, or enjoyment of reading? Because whatever our purpose is really going to depend not only on number 2, your text selection, but I'm going to jump ahead to number 4, what technology we're using. So back to number 2, the text selection. Not only is the book itself important because that needs to lend itself to whatever it is our purpose is, but again, how does what the viewer is seeing play into that? So if I really want to draw my students' attention to vocabulary, but I'm holding the book and they really can't see the words, and I'm trying to break them apart, I'm trying to show them some inflectional endings and they can't see it, the purpose of the read aloud is really lost. So if I'm doing something like that, I really want my students to see the book itself. And so I'll probably want to use a close-up, and then that would be a great place to use one of those cute cursors so that I can really highlight what's going on there. The time frame. So it is very, very easy to let these read alouds get pretty lengthy. So in thinking about our purpose, we don't want our interaction cues to be too long. We don't want to take too much time in there so that students' comprehension is lost, but we also need to really think about how much time we have in the day and our students and their attention spans. Even though reading books is highly engaging, sitting on a screen looking at a video for more than 20 minutes might not be something that our students can handle. So it's really important to think about the time frame. So then technologies. What technologies are available to you? What can you use? So you can get pretty high tech and use a digital book or scan your book in, put it on a PowerPoint and flip through it that way. Or you can still do a book close-up, pretty low tech, by just situating whatever you're using to film, perhaps it's your iPhone, above the book and looking down. I know personally when I do it, when I have my daughter read, I use 2 chairs and I use a basket that I would put papers in, and I just make sure that the camera is in between the grates on the basket, and then I can slip my book underneath there and away we go. And so that's a pretty low tech solution. So you just have to assess your skills, which you're willing to tinker with, and what is available to you to make it work. And then the final thought is what we were just talking about with that student engagement. How are you going to meaningfully engage students? In the classroom, we would turn and talk, we would create charts and have a meaningful discussion, but how are we using those tools, those digital tools now to get kids involved and thinking deeper about text? So here is an example of a teacher holding the book. And as I stated, sometimes it's pretty difficult for kiddos to see, or the viewer to see the text itself. But in this situation, Kelly, our reader here, used some digital tools to do a zoom in so that the audience could see a little bit better what is happening.
Hi. For the curl of your hair. What do you notice about our main character's peers? Why might they be looking at her? I think that maybe it's because she might look a bit different than they do. There will be times when no one understands the way words curl from your mouth, the beautiful language of the country you left behind. My name is Rigoberto. We just moved here from Venezuela, and because they don't understand, the classroom will fill with laughter until the teacher quiets everyone. Why do you think Rigoberto looks very happy and calm in this picture, but then in this picture, he looks pretty upset. I think that it could be because he's very happy to share about who he is. And then when this classroom doesn't understand and they laugh at him, he gets pretty upset.
So you can see the advantages in this video here, right? Kelly is able to connect with us as the viewers. We can see her facial expressions. We can see her body language. Something to think about is also your background. We can see what's on her desk as well. But that connection is really there. So if I'm a viewer, if I'm a student and I'm not quite sure about the prompt, I can use other cues to let me know what is happening in the book. And from Kelly's face there, I could see that Rigoberto was having a difficult time. She was also able to point really easily, right? So I knew exactly which picture to look at and when. Some of the limitations. She did zoom in on the pictures, which is fantastic. So we were able to use that visual literacy, but we weren't, as viewers, able to see any of the text itself. Now, that was not her purpose in this read aloud, but it's just an example of something to think about. And in this one specifically, she needed someone to film with her to do the zooming in. And they had to practice and really know what parts she wanted to zoom in on. So if that's a limitation, if this is something that you're filming on your own, it's just something to think about.
Hi, today we will.
All right, the next type of digital read aloud that you could consider making is to do more of a close-up of the book. So this is kind of the opposite of the one that we just looked at. This example we're about to show allows the reader, or the viewer, I should say, to clearly see the visual literacies because the pictures are very clear. You can also follow the text. In this example, the teacher has taken pictures of the pages and put them into a PowerPoint. So we can see close up exactly what each page of the book looks like. The teacher has also embedded narration on the slides. So it allows the student to pause naturally on the slide, to linger over a slide before going to the next page. It allows a little bit more control over the flow, whereas with the video, it's harder to go back and forth between parts of the book because you're not really sure where the teacher was on what page. However, one of the highlights of that last mode we looked at, the interaction with the reader, is completely absent. We have the teacher's voice and her expression, but we never get to see her face or to connect with her on a more personal level. In addition, that limits interactive cues. And even though we can see the text more clearly, some texts are still going to be hard to read in this format. Okay, so we're going to show you a sample of what this looks like. All right, so here we have an example of the PowerPoint as the digital read aloud.
The book of choice today is called What's in Your Mind Today, written by Louise Bladen and illustrated by Angela Perini. My name is Miss Nikki, and I will be reading it to you today. Now, I want you to go ahead and think about mindfulness. When you think about the word mindfulness or being mindful, what comes to mind for you? Take a second and share with someone that's close by.
Okay, in the slides, they go to the next page of the book. Typically, there's that pause, so the reader could even practice reading through the page themselves, and then it's read aloud.
What's in your mind today?
And on some of the slides,
Take it.
There are specific stopping points or prompts for the reader.
Count.
Right here, we see a stop and think related to comprehension. She has other ones where they stop and think and talk about vocabulary. Okay.
Okay, so here we have our third type, the integrated mix, where we're going to see the teacher holding the book and then it splices to a close-up.
Now we're going to look at this page. And do you see at the top how the pencil is writing the words? Why do you think that is? It's because the pencil is the narrator, right? Do you know what the narrator of a story is? It's the person who is telling the story, and we get to hear it from their point of view. So he was red, but he wasn't very good at it. Oh dear. His teacher thought he needed more practice.
So we can see from that short clip that Emma even went so far as every time she turned the page, she cut back to herself doing it, so that students really got that experience of someone is reading this book to me. So there's still that connection with the reader. We could still look at her facial expressions. And students had that wait time, just as they would in the classroom, to really think about their answers. You can also follow the text. Now, in this situation, again, students, the way she had the video at the camera going, students might not have been able to completely follow, but there was more of an opportunity to follow than when she was just holding the book itself up. And then she, of course, had greater control over the narration and the time and that sort of thing. Now, she was, Emma, this example, she flipped the pages herself. In other examples that we've seen, sometimes that cut from the student holding the book or the book itself is a little sudden. There's not any warning for the viewer, and so you don't really know what's coming. It's very small, but just something to think about. And it requires some technical skills. And so I myself wouldn't know how to do this. As I stated earlier, I'm just propping up my cell phone to record things. So you'll either need some time to do some tinkering here or some skills on how to make that happen.
Now we're going to look at this page.
All right, another version of that integrated mix that we're going to share is one where you actually record reading with children present. So in this example, there's going to be cuts between looking close up at the book and then cutting to the teacher reading with a child present. So it allows for more authentic interactions with children. We know that as viewers, children are more likely to respond when they see other children engaging and responding too. It creates more of that reading experience. It also, though, could limit the likeliness of the viewer actively engaging. They might not need to come up with answers to the questions because they're just waiting for the child on the screen to answer the question. And also the teacher might be more focused on the children that are physically present and not spending as many interaction cues with the viewers on the other end of the camera. All right, so here we have this example from Sierra Bacon with Sparkle Boy.
You can't have glittery nails, Casey, she said. Why? Casey asked. Because boys don't wear glittery nail polish, said Jessie. Right, Daddy? Daddy thought for a minute. Most boys don't wear nail polish, he said. But Casey can if he wants to. There's no harm in that. Right? It's not going to hurt anyone if a boy wears nail polish.
It could hurt his feelings if people make fun of him.
It could hurt his feelings if people make fun of him. But do you feel like they need to make fun of him for that?
No, it's his life. He has his choices.
I think so too. He can do what he wants, right? You.
Okay, and in our last example, we have a sample of what the digital read aloud would look like if you were using screencasting. So as we mentioned before, this option allows you to record the screen and record a webcam. So it could be where you have a slideshow and a face in the corner. In this example that we're actually going to highlight, she has just the screen recording herself reading because she is using a chapter book, which we haven't talked about yet. How do you do the interactive read aloud digitally when you don't have any pictures on the pages? So in this case, she has used a green screen to put herself in a prairie as she's reading the book Prairie Lotus. She's able to record herself doing the reading. And you're going to see she's integrated using the tool Edpuzzle, some opportunities for interaction that pop up at pre-designated points to ask readers to engage in some way. All right, so here's a sample from Emily.
All right, adventurers. Today we're reading chapters 11 and 12 in our Prairie Lotus text. So make sure you have your book ready and open to go to read along. Hannah's steps slowed as she neared the schoolhouse. She had to force her feet to continue up the building and into the lean-to. Not until she took off her bonnet did she notice the quiet.
And we'll just pause it there, but you can see these little cues here are stopping points. These are the video events, or basically where a multiple choice question comes up, the child can respond to, open-ended questions as well. All of the answers get sent back to the teacher's page. And so it's a way you can create the interactive moments right within the technological format there. Okay, so stop sharing the screen here. Go ahead.
So you were just given some examples from our students. And as we thought about creating digital read alouds, we also thought about the reflection process and the steps that we go through, as well as our students went through here to create these videos, these digital read alouds. And so we asked some of those students that you saw that were featured in these videos to do a little reflection on the process of making these, their thoughts, their challenges, their struggles. And so they recorded some short videos here that we're going to share with you. So you can understand what it was like on their end and some of those things that they thought about.
So when I first started making my interactive read aloud, I first filmed a video of me reading, and then I filmed just the pictures. And I tried editing that on iMovie, and I didn't really like the way that it turned out. I thought that it wasn't really natural, and I felt like I was kind of forcing it out. So I decided to start over from scratch and think of a new idea. And when I was looking at other interactive read alouds on YouTube, I noticed that a lot of them were kind of similar to my first idea. So since I wanted a more natural one, I decided that I was just going to read and film me reading just all the way through. And then I edited my video to have it zoom in as I was reading and asking my questions. So I decided to do that so that it would be more natural and a different way than what I've seen other people do for their interactive read alouds. And I had a lot of fun during the process. I felt like it was fun planning. It was fun editing my video. And I thought that having a more natural video would benefit a lot of young readers. So yeah.
Hi, I'm Emma, and I'm here to tell you just a little bit about my process of making a recorded digital read aloud for my children's literature class this last semester. So my first step was just going to the library on campus and picking out the book that I wanted to read. I wanted to make sure that I chose a book that had like an important message that I wanted children to hear. And so I just went to our library on campus. We're really lucky to have a nice library here with a really wide variety of children's literature to choose from. So I was there and I chose my book. And then after that, my next step was deciding what kinds of questions I wanted to ask, because that was one of the requirements of the assignment, was to ask questions throughout to kind of keep the readers engaged. So I decided I wanted to incorporate questions kind of about literature in general by asking about things like conflict and the narrator of the story and font and stuff like that. I also wanted to ask more fun questions and questions that were also more specific to the plot of the story. So next came actually recording the read aloud. And as far as my use of technology went for this process, I knew I wanted to put close-up pictures of each page of the book on the screen as I was reading the words on each page. So that was like my jumping off point, I guess. And so my first step was just sitting down and actually recording the whole thing of me just sitting in a chair in my room reading the book to the camera. And then after that, I took the pictures that I had taken of each individual page just using my phone, and I inserted those into the video clips and lined them up with when I was talking about each page. And I used iMovie for this. And so after I did that, then it was easy to just edit it all together and put on the finishing touches and upload it to YouTube.
Hello, my name is Sierra Bacon. I did my interactive read aloud on a book called Sparkle Boy. Super fun, really cute book. Love this one. When I started planning my digital read aloud, my goal was to highlight the author's message in an authentic way. I picked a book that focuses on social emotional competencies, one that is changing the way we view social norms. I centered it around my focal student in a way that gave him a chance to explore gender norms. I read the book to myself and prepared the questions so that I could stop and discuss throughout. As you can see in the video, my focal student works through a complex view-changing thought process as a response to the prompts I presented him with. In terms of technology, I used the resources I had at home and worked with the knowledge I already had. I propped up my phone so it was stationary during the filming process. And then I filmed a separate video of the pages of the book with no audio. I uploaded both videos on my MacBook and used iMovie to add transitions and dub the audio. In order to easily share the video, I uploaded it to YouTube. I hope that you enjoy it and that my experience can help you in your planning.
So as you can, or as you heard, our pre-service teachers are beginning to work through and grapple with some of the same things that we are. So where do we go from here on these ready-made and teacher-created digital read-alouds? Hopefully the pandemic is coming to an end and schools will be back face-to-face. But our argument is, are they? We have seen this influx in people's appreciation for the virtual classroom. And we're wondering how much these read-alouds can then be used in those settings. Now, what is interesting is in all the examples that we showed you, they were created during the portion of the pandemic when copyright rules were relaxed. Publishers very graciously allowed teachers and educators to use their books and in online formats, like you just saw, so that we can continue educating our children. Those rules are continuously in flux as things are changing in our world daily. And so just a caveat that you definitely want to make sure that you're following those copyright rules before you go ahead and use any ready-made or creating your own read aloud. But if you are going to use them and continue to use them in virtual settings, they could be great for these hybrid classrooms. I know personally, I teach in a lot of hybrid classrooms. And so if I, as you heard, I teach a children's literature course. If I'm going to use a read aloud, it can be pretty difficult for those kids that are still in Zoom. Also thinking about those hybrid spaces where sometimes kids are virtual a couple days a week and face-to-face a couple days a week. These are great for those home days. And just as people, like the online education more, this is just another tool to have in our back pocket to make sure that we're providing those same skills and same opportunities as they would get in classrooms. In face-to-face classrooms, we might think, oh, we're going back. We might not need these anymore. There really is no substitution for that face-to-face read aloud. However, if we strategically use these, we might be able to leverage what we're able to do in the classroom. So literacy at home, we know that our kids are going home to very different contexts. Some students might not have the opportunity to have books read to them at home. And not only, instead of just having students, send a book home and read it to themselves or an older sister or brother, or even just give them a link to any old recorded read aloud. If we purposely give them these recorded read alouds to look at home, maybe they're drawing a picture and bringing it back to us the next day. And so that we can have that connectedness with them, and that these kids are still getting that additional boost that they might need. And then the flexibility. So when we think about the time in our literacy block, it's so precious. And so if you were in a situation where you needed to maximize the time that you were spending one-on-one with students, maybe during conferring or in guided reading groups, if you pulled out the face-to-face read aloud and had students work through that in perhaps a center or a station, not all the time, but periodically, you would be able to maximize that time that you are spending with small groups or one-on-one in that really intentional targeted learning. So that's just another option, another way that we can bring these into our classrooms, and so that we're facilitating and maximizing in our time. And so if you're wondering where we got any of our information background from, here are our references. You can also take a look at some of our in-press publications that will be coming out soon in the Reading Teacher, and those references will be in that article as well. And we just want to thank you for joining us today. We know that your time is very precious, and we appreciate you hanging out here with us for a little while, and hope that you have found this meaningful and that you've thought of some ideas for your own classroom. Please feel free to reach out to either of us if you would like some more of those references, would like anything in print. You can see Lindsay's email there, as well as mine at St. Norbert. So thank you very much.